So welcome to tonight's event, organized by Contemporary Turkish Studies at LSE and the British Institute at Ankara, the BIAA. Okay. My name is Yaprak Gürsoy, and I'm Professor of European Politics here at LSE, and I'm also the chair in Contemporary Turkish Studies. Before we start, let me just quickly say that this is a hybrid event, so we have apparently around 50 people online watching us at the moment, not you necessarily, maybe the front rows. And we are recording the event, and we will try to make it available as a podcast or a YouTube video later on, depending on the technical difficulties we might or might not face. And tonight, we are here to discuss water infrastructure, policy, and scarcity in Türkiye, exploring these issues through the contested idea of national hydraulic mission. We are fortunate to have two excellent speakers, two experts on the issue of water in Türkiye, looking at it from the perspective of the past, present, and future. Arda Bilgen, who's one of the speakers today, is a research officer at the LSE Middle East Center. He co-leads the Kuwait program project Water Security in Kuwait, exploring the water citizenship approach to sustainable water futures. Dr. Bilgen's work mainly focuses on global water governance, transboundary water politics, national water infrastructure policies, and local experiences of water insecurity. So he is really the expert to talk these issues with. Our second speaker is Jim Crow, who is a professor emeritus of Roman and Byzantine archaeology at the University of Edinburgh and visiting professor at Newcastle University. Currently, he serves as the chair of the British Institute at Ankara, hence why we are co-organizing this event with them. Until 2023, Jim was the co-investigator of a project on water in Istanbul, Rising to the Challenge, contrasting water management between the Byzantine, early Ottoman, and contemporary cities. So he will be able to bring in the past into this debate. Among his numerous publications, he has also done work on hydraulic infrastructure and landscape archaeology in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. So the way we designed this panel is rather than having each speaker give a talk, we thought that it would be better to have a conversation. So first I will ask some questions to our speakers, and they will take turns in answering the questions for around half an hour. Then we are going to open the floor to your questions for another half an hour. For the online audience, you can submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can do that anytime. And for those of you who are in the room, once our initial discussion is finished, I'm going to open the floor to your questions, and you can raise your hand and ask your question. I will try to ensure that I get, a range of questions, both online and in the room, but I can't guarantee it because chairing a hybrid event is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So I apologize in advance for that. And for those of you who are in the room, we'll have a drinks reception so we can carry on the conversation there. So, okay, so if you're ready for my questions, I think we can start. So my first question will be to Jim, because I think it's appropriate to follow a rather chronological order for things. And this title of the event, this hydraulic mission title, which you point with Arda. So what does that mean from a historical perspective or from the perspective of the past? What does hydraulic mission mean?
Well, it's particularly associated with great cities. And the obvious example is Rome. Rome and the Romans carried their hydraulic mission across the Roman Empire. But my interest is still, in a sense, Roman. It's late Roman and what we now call Byzantine, or it's really Eastern Roman. Is what happens when Constantinople is founded, contemporary Istanbul. There was a city there before Byzantium, but then Constantine created a much larger city. and to enable a city to achieve a size almost comparable to ancient Rome. The maximum extent, it was probably 500,000. It was necessary to bring water in. There wasn't sufficient water within the city to be able to satisfy the demands of that population. And so the emperors not from Constantine, but his successor, Constantius II, clearly had a real mission to recreate the Roman water infrastructure, but also they faced challenges which Rome itself didn't face, because Rome itself is surrounded by a range of good water aquifers, and it was possible to create a number of aqueducts. Whereas for Constantinople, Byzantium, the water was much more distant. And so it was an extraordinary achievement in terms of, it was the greatest achievement in the ancient world in terms of the length of the water supply system that was created. It was in terms of its sinuosity, not as the crow flies, but in terms of its sinuosity, creeping through, and remember it was gravity fed, this water, there were no pumping. It was over 216 kilometers. And so that in itself was a remarkable achievement. But the greatest achievement for any infrastructure is to sustain it. It's all well and good creating something, you put in a great deal of money into it, and the building process is finished, and then you neglect it. But if you neglect it, then it doesn't fulfill the function it was intended to. And so what's remarkable about the Constantinopolitan system is that infrastructure was sustained over a very long period of time. And then, of course, within the city, sorry, it's on your phone, there was a system of water capture in terms of cisterns. And so the great system, of course, is the Basilica system or the Yerebeton.
Just for reference, is my screensaver on my phone, so we were just talking about that.
That's right. I stuck this off. It was an all too familiar site, It's just been restored wonderfully by the Belgian. And so we have this extraordinary system. I mean, there are over 200 known systems within Constantinople. We still don't. We had another project before that. We worked with Kerim Altu, who is a Turkish archaeologist who works in the Belgian. And he's also worked on the water supply, but particularly within the city in terms of the cisterns. So this is, to sustain that system over long periods of time. But one of the interesting aspects of it is that when the city, after regime change in 1453, the Ottomans were faced with a city which was in decline. There's no question about it. The last 2 centuries of Byzantine rule were a period of decline. And there wasn't the ability to sustain the scale of population or the scale of infrastructure. And we have some rather remarkable descriptions, which it's not time to go into. But as soon as Mehmet Fadi came in, one of the key things was to re-establish using some, but not all of the sources of the earlier Roman Byzantine system. And I think one of the most remarkable evidence for that is a series of maps which were created by originally created by an Italian monk from the beginning of the 15th century called Buondelmonti. The last of these, which shows the very early Ottoman cities. So it shows the Yenisaray, what we now call the Topkapi. It shows the Yedikule. And it shows various key elements, but it's the first representation of the aqueduct of what we sometimes call the aqueduct of Valens, or the Bozdoğan Kemeri, which is such a prominent feature of Istanbul today, reminding us of that remarkable infrastructure. And the first visual representation is not in a Byzantine text, it's actually in an Ottoman, but it's from early Ottoman times in a text which was created probably in the Latin West. And then from then onwards, of course, we have the great aqueducts in the Belgrade Omana, which particularly Sinan created, the Marava and so forth.
So the mission, you would say, is to actually bring water. I mean, it's a big project.
It's a big project, and it's the ability of a society to sustain that project.
Okay.
It's first of all, it's to create it, and then to sustain it.
Okay, wonderful. And So, Arda, if we look at modern Turkey, how did the hydraulic missions of the Republic take shape, and what were their main goals? Do you agree that it was to create these projects and then to sustain them?
Yeah, sure. I'll start by clarifying what I like, how I understand the hydraulic mission. Drawing on scholars like Carl Fogel, James Scott, or Tony Allen, I use the term to describe a modernist and technopolitical.
Your mic turned on.
I think it's on.
Okay.
So it's a modernist paradigm that through which states seek to consolidate their power, promote development, and reshape society and territory through large-scale water infrastructure. So it's a way of governing water that prioritizes supply-side solutions, engineering expertise, and national development. So in Turkey, just as Jim said, like even though there's a continuity between the late Ottoman period and the modern republic in terms of water resources development efforts, the hydraulic mission took a more systematic way following the creation of the State Hydraulic Works, or DSI, in 1953. And I think this was consolidated further after the creation of the now defunct State Planning Organization, or DPT, in 1960. So these two institutions worked together to embed water infrastructure in their national development planning.
So DSI is Devlet Su İşleri.
Yes.
So State Water Works.
State Hydraulic Works.
Hydraulic Works.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, DSI became the key institution responsible for constructing, operating, and planning infrastructure across the country. And during that time, Turkey was divided into 26 different hydrological basins, and planning shifted from a fragmented form to a more holistic form, where infrastructure projects were the key elements of regional development. So here the idea was not only to prevent waters from flowing in vain, but also to mobilize them to support various national development goals, like the energy security, industrial growth, or agricultural modernization. So, but at the same time, infrastructure played a key role in state making and nation making, or nation building, because large dams and irrigation systems also help the state to gain visibility, or in some cases gain legitimacy, particularly in historically marginalized parts of Turkey, especially in southern Turkey and eastern Turkey. So in this sense, the hydraulic mission was not only an economic mission, but also it was a social and political grand scheme aimed to transform regions and populations, and integrating them more closely to national economy and national polity. Probably the major milestone of this process was the construction of the Keban Dam in the Keban region in the mid-1960s on the Euphrates River, as this dam would later on form the foundation or the groundwork for a larger project, which we today call the Southeastern Anatolian Project, or GAP. So this very large project, the ambitious GAP, which consists of like a very extensive dams, hydroelectric power plants, and irrigation systems, perhaps represents the clearest example of hydraulic mission, because much like its earlier predecessors, like let's say the Tennessee Valley Authority in the US, which is considered as the granddaddy of all these schemes. Just like that project, its primary aim was to use multiple dams for multiple purposes and accelerate regional development through large water infrastructure. And when we come to the 2000s, from the mid-2000 onwards, the hydraulic mission was extended through literally a boom in small-scale water infrastructure as well. So what in Turkish called hidroelectric santralleri or HES projects was I mean, this process was driven by the neoliberal transformation of the political economy of Turkey, of course. But the idea was to meet Turkey's growing energy demand by exploiting the so-called untapped or unused water resources and harness them for the national development purposes. Also, large interbasin water transfer projects are still part of this mission, like projects like the Greater Melan project, or which aims to transfer water from Düzce to Istanbul, like via a 200-kilometer long pipeline, or similarly, the pipeline project that supplies water from southern Turkey to northern Cyprus today through 80 kilometers long water pipeline. They're all part of this mission oriented goal, and they show that water infrastructure has been used for to achieve many goals, from securing urban growth to geopolitical interests. So overall, I would say Turkey's hydraulic mission has been shaped by strong bureaucratic institutions, very ambitious and large infrastructure projects, and also shifting national development goals or priorities, which are all embedded in larger geopolitical and domestic considerations. But ultimately, the mission has been about so-called taming water and using it as a strategic resource to advance economic growth, state power, and in some cases, security interests at both domestic and international levels.
Okay. So multiple aims and multiple goals through these missions and projects. But that's kind of the supply side. So if we look at the impact these missions have on societies and the environment in the past and in the present, what would you say? What was, or how would you summarize the impact? So that's a question for both of you. So the past and perhaps the present. Maybe Jim can have it go.
Yeah. It's the development, particularly the Kaban project, it's very interesting in terms of the emergence of archaeological organization in Turkey, because if the Kaban project, and this is in the 1960s, there was awareness that this large area of water, it's not as big as the Atatürk barrage, but it's still a big area of water. It's to the north of Elazığ, was going to flood a lot of archaeology. And so this was set up through METU, Middle Eastern Technical University, and there were a series of surveys carried out, and then a series of teams, both Turkish and foreign teams, were invited to excavate. And when I was an undergraduate, I went to visit one of these projects at Ashvan, which is quite a long time ago. And there was a village which was to disappear under 40 or 50 meters of water. And across the, I still have a slide, across the plain was a really fertile area, which was then going to be flooded. So, but this had an impact not just on the local communities, obviously, and there's a really significant social side to all this in terms of the local indigenous peoples. But there's also an impact on the development of Turkish rescue archaeology and awareness of rescue archaeology and the organization of that. So that when the next huge water project began, which was basically in the 1980s, which was the emergence of just before the Atatürk barrage was finished in 1992, wasn't it? Yeah. I actually, and again, I was involved in that when I was in Ankara in the late 70s. And there was a series of surveys, and once again, sites were allocated and sites were excavated. But once again, you could see the organization, there were a lot more Turkish teams by that stage. So I think it's had a real impact on both the awareness in Turkish archaeology of the need for rescue and the damage which the dam can do. And I'll end by just one insight, which is very recent. Many of you will be aware of the remarkable findings from the pre-Neolithic at Göbekli Tepe. Well, I read that last week, as a consequence of the scouring on the sides of the Ataturk barrage, and even where the former ancient city of Samsak was, this is in the Adıyaman area, they had uncovered, wasn't as big, but the waters had actually scoured about 2 meters of soil away and revealed another one of these pre-Neolithic statues. So there are, in archaeological terms, sometimes there are benefits as well as losses.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk about the costs, like ecological and social costs rather than the gains. But of course, we should remember that, like when these projects were designed and implemented in the 1960s or 70s, you know, the concepts like sustainability, ecological corridors, or environmental impact assessments, I mean, they were literally non-existent. I mean, they were barely there. So, like Turkey formally recognized environmental protection as a constitutional right in the 1982 constitution, and the concept of sustainability or sustainable development entered into policy agendas in the mid 1990s. And later on, of course, with the EU accession process in the 2000s, many like it brought further changes, and the government made a lot of attempts to align its water governance in line with the EU Water Framework Directive. But in practice, as I said in my previous answer, development priorities always came first, I would say, and it continues to dominate. And unfortunately, social and ecological concerns have remained only secondary to economic objectives. So these trade-offs have been justified based on things like through the discourses of sacrificing for the greater good, or shifting the blame on Turkey's the critical geography, or or climate. But as a result, social and environmental impacts have been unevenly distributed across society. I can maybe single out 3 notable impacts of this mission. First, of course, displacement in the Keban region and also in the Gap region. Hundreds and thousands of people were displaced due to large dams like the Keban Dam, Atatürk Dam, or Ulusu Dam. Even though the resettlement schemes were there, many affected communities still faced difficulties because of inadequate socioeconomic support, psychological support, or inadequate compensation. And in many cases, displacement actually triggered migration to larger cities rather than ensuring a sustainable rural development. Second notable impact would be environmental degradation related to irrigation practices and groundwater extraction. So the rapid transition to irrigation in certain regions, like the Gap regions, for instance, in the mid 1990s, unfortunately caused soil salinization in the Harran Plain because farmers were not ready; they were not prepared for irrigated agricultural practices, or in central Anatolia, for instance, because of often unlicensed and excessive groundwater extraction has contributed to. Oh, by the way, I had slides and I completely forgot about that.
Come on.
And
I just need to go ahead once.
All of us forgot about your slides.
doesn't seem to work.
There we go.
Sorry, here we are. Yeah, I mean, they caused these sinkholes, particularly in the Konya Basin. And finally, the third one would be culturally and ecologically irreversible like losses. Like large dams have erased many cultural and historically significant sites such as the Zülfü or Hasan Cave. And while some artifacts were successfully relocated and protected, much of this heritage has been gone, like permanently lost. And smaller hydropower projects too, like HES projects, particularly in the Black Sea region, have also had well-documented impacts on biodiversity or ecosystems. And more recently, planned mega projects like Istanbul, for instance, are projected to have, again, irreversible and severe environmental consequences, including the destruction of forests, saltwater intrusion, or serious risks to the Marmara Sea ecosystem, including exacerbating this mucilage problem and also pollution. So, in short, Turkey's hydraulic mission has not been as neutral or as flawless as it's often presented, and it has created clear winners and losers. It has prioritized national development goals over local concerns, and also it has relied on this, how can I say, like the hegemonic power of development discourse to manufacture consent, even among those most affected by the consequences of this hydraulic mission.
Right. So, Jim, I mean, you had a positive kind of outlook to this question. I guess it is always possible to think in terms of like, what did we learn from this experience? So I want to perhaps ask you to think a little bit more about like what we learned or what we failed to learn, and with regard to the past and the current projects. So is there a link between the past projects and how they affect today's water problems? Like, what is the connection between the past projects and today's water issues, perhaps in Istanbul or in other parts of Turkey?
It's difficult to see an immediate connection in terms of water. I mean, in Istanbul, it's in the recent history of Istanbul. I remember I deal with a long history, so I feel the 19th century is recent to me. So, the late 19th century, there was this transition from the more traditional forms of Ottoman water capture to what might be called the arrival of modernity, which was really with the Terkos, taking water from the Terkos Lake. Yeah. But in order to take water from the Terkos Lake, then you had to use electricity, you had to use steam power pumping systems. So you have to use pumping systems. So there are losses, but then there was a sort of a decline in the use of the more local water supplies, which came from the Belgrade Ormanı. And those were somehow neglected, and they became tainted, and so those were no longer available. So the city, by creating a new modern water source, neglected its older sources, and actually diminished the quantities of water that were available. So there are instances like that. But in the contemporary, I know from those I work with in Istanbul, I know the contemporary water systems. I don't know the ones on the east, on the eastern side of the Bosphorus, but I know that the same sources that were used by the late Roman, the Byzantine system, which is we go long, deep into Thracia. Now there are a whole series of sort of small dams on the fringes of the Black Sea, which capture the water and then bring it down. But actually, they feed the water into Terkos. But that water, by capturing the water there, they're actually diminishing the water for the local communities. And so there's a real sense that the city is taking the water from those in rural areas. And of course, Istanbul, in almost in every sense. I remember somebody, prominent Turkish archaeologist in Istanbul University, who works in Thracia. He says, well, you look at Thracia and it looks as though Istanbul is eating it up all the time. And actually, when you fly over Thracia, it's even, in the passes perhaps, even more so, you can see it. It's consuming that countryside, that landscape, which is a very rural, wooded landscape, particularly in the northern part. But it was this interesting insight that the water that was being taken today for the city, and obviously the demands of Eviski, the local water company, is so significant that it had a real impact on the local communities, so that they no longer had the water because the water tables were now taken away so quickly. And that's just one small insight, and as Adnan said, you can take that across very large areas. After all, for much of Turkey, it's a water scarce country.
Okay, yeah. So that's I guess like the human security dimension, but shifting the focus to security in the sense of international relations, perhaps. Are the wise water in Türkiye especially understood as a security issue? Because as an IR, let's say, scholar and interested in international relations, that's how water came into my understanding, that it was always more of a national security matter, not necessarily human security.
Well, the securitization of water, by the way, can we move on to the next slide? The clicker still doesn't work.
I can do it for you.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you for bringing this up. But like the securitization of water is not really unique to Turkey or Turkey's region, I would say. In early hydropolitics literature, there was this strong tendency to frame water as a source of conflict, which gave rise to this popular narrative of water wars, which we sometimes still see. But research, or like more critical approaches to hydropolitics, has shown that actually cooperation has prevailed, even in very sensitive regions like the Middle East. And now it is widely accepted that actually it's not either or, but the conflict and cooperation rather coexist. They're not mutually beneficial, mutually exclusive. I'm sorry. So like water still continues to be securitized because for understandable reasons. It's vital for our survival. It's irreplaceable. It's scarce. So quite simply, it's a cliche, but it's life itself, right? And makes it politically sensitive by nature. In Turkey's case, water is securitized mostly at transboundary levels. So as you can see on this map, Turkey shares 5 transboundary basins in its immediate neighborhood, and water is surprisingly securitized in some basins, but it remains surprisingly desecuritized in some others. It is interesting, for instance, that despite Armenia and Turkey don't have any official formal diplomatic relations, these two countries have been operating the Arpachai Dam since 1985 successfully without any problems, or despite many border or security problems with Iraq. These two countries again have developed various cooperative frameworks that links water issues with trade, energy, other sectors. But of course, in more sensitive basins, or when it comes to more sensitive issues, I think this notion of water nationalism, or the claim that it's our water or our data or our rivers, or are they Turkish rivers, are they Arab rivers, is it Persian Gulf, is it Arab Gulf? This kind of thinking, this zero-sum thinking always hinders basin-wide cooperation and make sustained peace difficult. But that said, of course, in addition to its formal track 1 diplomatic efforts, Turkey has also actively participated in track 2 and track 1.5 water diplomacy efforts. The most recent or most well-known one being the Blue Peace Initiative in the Middle East. So the idea is to promote water as a the catalyst for regional development and peace rather than a source of conflict. And also beyond its neighborhood, Turkey has been actively, in a way, exporting its water expertise to the Middle East, the Caucasus, the Balkans, Central Asia, or even to Africa. And institutions like the Turkish Water Institute has been, training many foreign experts in wastewater treatment or other water governance issues. And So based on this, I can say Turkey only selectively securitizes and desecuritizes on a case-by-case basis. And in this setting, water simultaneously functions as a development tool, as a foreign policy tool, as a means of shaping regional and international identity around water, including its ambition to position itself as a regional or even a global hydro hub.
Okay. And so last two questions, and you can be shorter in your answers if you want. But Jim, you talked about like how kind of the urban settings eat away from the rural areas and their water supplies. But when it comes to water policy, is there any similarity between urban and rural settings, you think?
In the past, you mean?
In the past, now, based on your experience?
I think possibly it was, well, I've been involved in, as you mentioned at the outset, I was involved in this Water in Istanbul Rising to the Challenge, where we were looking at long-time water use in Byzantine and then early Ottoman and then its contemporary water scene. But that was in parallel with another project, which was also, which the British Institute were also involved with, which was also funded by the British Academy, which was in the Konya Plain, in the Chumra area. And that was again looking at long-term using records and documentation. And one of the lessons from that, which was very interesting, was that in order to try and establish in a period of, I mean, we all accept that we live in a time of climate crisis. And of course, this was one of the reasons why it was so relevant both for Istanbul and also for elsewhere. But it was what was recognized from the Konya Plain study was that there was certainly a huge, because of the excessive use of what Arda already mentioned, extraction of water and all sorts of things. But they actually carried out computer simulations, and having looked at the long-term water, what would have been there and what has been extracted and so forth, they recognized that through careful management was much more likely, or sort of improper usage was much more likely to be the real challenge for the water sources rather than the actual change of the climate. And I think that's a lesson which also came out from our study in Istanbul, that we talked to the water managers in İSKİ, in the municipality, the huge municipality, and I'll say very little about that. But what came out there was that by looking at alternatives, by reminding them, they lived in the city after all, reminding them what the city had, which were all these cisterns and this system of rainwater harvesting. They actually, in Kadıköy in particular, the municipality became very interested in they set up a new project was set up following our original initiative, just to develop ideas of management and rainwater harvesting within the municipality. And so I think there are lessons, but the lessons are, but one of the, as I think at the outset, it's with the infrastructure, the important thing with an infrastructure, even whether it's rural or urban, it's how you can sustain that by careful usage through time rather than allowing people to recklessly damage it.
But I think, from our previous discussions, you were also saying that sometimes, putting an end to water management could be difficult because of electoral reasons.
Oh yes, there are. I mean, it was very interesting talking to the water managers. For instance, in Istanbul, they said, well, the real problem in Istanbul is the cost of water is too low. Therefore, it's too low, so people can wash their cars. And so if you live in a city which has a fragile water, I think it's even worse in Ankara, although it may have got slightly better this winter. But these cities, all these cities, Athens is the same until very recently. All these cities, there is profligate use of water because water is not recognized as being a commodity which is so so crucial for human life, as Ida's already mentioned, and that people think it's better to wash their cars. And there was another issue about water was, the way that water was provided for large high-rise blocks. And in practice, ISKI were complaining that people build blocks of new houses over 5 stories, and they're expected to pay for the cost of pumping the water up to the tops. Now, it's not the developers who pay for this, but apparently ISKI are confronted by this. This was a great shock. So there's this notion that water is a commodity. It's, in a sense, it's not the water as a commodity that everybody can use. It's a commodity which people can be profitable with.
Okay, Arda, I think it's time for us to look a little bit into the future. So with climate change, which we already mentioned, what should guide our future water policy and policies?
Well, I mean, instead of giving advice to that government or this institution, I would like to feel a few things from a broader perspective, if I may. So I think despite institutional and legal reforms over the years, water governance in Turkey remains predominantly technocratic. Supply side solutions are still prioritized over demand management, and decision making remains top down. Meaningful stakeholder participation is still limited. Like even though the right to water is acknowledged, it's not really practiced or realized in practice. And similarly, some global water governance principles like OECD principles or IWMI principles, they are only selectively and partially implemented at national and local levels. So as a result, the existing frameworks, governance frameworks cannot really or cannot fully respond to like today's climate-induced risks. So as Turkey, as you said, like faces a climate crisis, which is also a water crisis, I think a paradigm shift is definitely needed, and we need to move away from conceptualizing water as something to be like exploited, or from like this purely technocratic approach to move towards more sociopolitically or ecologically sensitive approaches to governance. So this means water should not be a resource to be engineered, but instead we should acknowledge its social, political, ecological, or archaeological, cultural dimensions. So I mean, I don't know if any of you has a chance to take a look or has seen this, but the UN has recently published a report, and it has announced that we are in the period of global water bankruptcy, which means many river basins or lakes or surface waters, I mean, they're losing their ability to return back to their historical normal. So in this context, I think redefining, again, I'm missing my slide. So redefining our relationship with water is, I think, an urgency, because, I mean, if we want a just, sustainable and ecological and equitable water future, this is required. Otherwise, we may not be talk about a water future in the future. So I'll stop here and
on that rather pessimistic note, we can open the floor to questions. So we have approximately 15 minutes, and so I just realized that we are occupying this room only for an hour. So that means we don't have the usual time we have for questions, but hopefully 15 minutes will be sufficient to get some questions in. If there are any online questions, Laura will send them to me. And what we are going to do is, because we don't have the microphone, I will have to repeat the questions in the room for the online audience. Mina.
Oh, right. Thank you. This is really very excellent talks by both of the speakers. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that you know, I'm old enough to remember. It's not a question, sorry. Is that all right? Just 2 minutes. I'm old enough to remember the formation of this Devlet Su İşleri, the state waterworks, the state planning organization, and my aim in life was to go and work in the state planning organization, etc. And I, not only that, but my father was a soil physics and irrigation specialist, and he worked, I mean, I've already mentioned this to Arda, he worked all over some of the major river basins in the world. And I just wanted to say that at that time, this was like the AI revolution. I mean, this was the green revolution. We, you know, through these sort of irrigation, soil physics, dams, etc., new seed varieties, the famine was conquered in the Indian subcontinent and various other places in the world. So, you know, we and like all revolutions, they need to be regulated, as Arda is saying. And looked at carefully. And even at that time, my father was going around grumbling in India saying, well, everyone uses the model of the Tennessee Valley Authority, but that they have really big land holdings in America, and that doesn't suit the Indian small land holdings. And also people who are designing these projects don't go talk to the farmers and the peasants and get all the information to make it locally appropriate and so on. So I think it just has, just like any other technology, it just needs to be looked at in that way.
Well, I mean, you know, thanks for sharing that kind of memory, the personal memory. So don't worry, I remember also the GAP project being a major project, and I oftentimes joke to Arda, what happened to the GAP project? When I was a child, that was the only thing that I almost, you know, we were bombarded with the information of how this was going to change the Turkish landscape and politics and society, but then it was all of a sudden forgotten, and perhaps because it wasn't so successful after all.
By the way, it's ongoing.
It is ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, 91% of the energy projects, and I would say 65% of the irrigation projects have been completed, but it's ongoing.
Okay. That makes me feel a bit younger, I guess. Any questions or further comments? Please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Alper. I'm doing a master's in political economy and political science here. And my question was about, you mentioned the Kanal Istanbul project. And I have seen and read many articles about how it is going to be fatal for the water, like usable water in Istanbul region. And do you see any way that it's feasible in some sort of way, or is it really that big of an issue? It's detrimental to Istanbul's water source.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me just quickly, for the online audience, the question is about the Kanal Istanbul projects, whether there are any positive splits at all, or is it just a major...
I mean, I personally don't see any benefits, and also I'm not an engineer, but I personally don't see any benefits, and I think these reports prepared by, you know, the professional organizations or, you know, the independent institutions do reflect the true story rather than the hyper politicized story of this mega project. But maybe Jim might want to add a few things based on his experience with working.
Well, it's an area I know quite well, although I know a little further to the west rather than where the canal is supposed to go. But it will be devastating in many ways for that whole region. As I've already said, as you get further out of Istanbul into the forest, it's quite remarkable that within a close part to this enormous city, there is a place where you can be pretty much lost. And once the canal project is created, it will push that area of urbanization, which will be associated with the canal, and which is, it's not just the canal, it's the new towns which could be built with it, you know, it's just opportunities for new developments. And with those new developments, it will impinge even further into this green lung for the city, which is what so much of Trakia still is in the northern part. So I think it would be devastating, and it will be devastating for the archaeology, but there's been so little attempt to look at the archaeology in that region I despair, basically.
On my question, I can read it here.
Oh, that would be great.
Also, you don't, I can hear, we can hear, there's like a microphone.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
perfect. And do we need to actually change the screen? For
I have it
online
here.
audience? All
I
right,
have it
great.
here.
Thank you very much.
So question by Roger Higginson. To what extent did water development projects in Turkey have an impact on water supplies in territories lying downstream to the south of the country, in particular Syria and Iraq? And was this factor taken into account?
I think that question is directed to me. Yeah, in my previous project, I with my PR Michael Mason from LSE, we actually looked at this phenomenon and we examined surface water changes in the Euphrates and Tigris basin. I mean, if you look at the the historical development of these basins, of course, back in the days, back in the 1960s, when no riparian country had any ambitious, development projects, on any of the rivers, there was no concern, like, there was no problem. But, as each one of the riparian states, started to build many dams or, and decided to use this water for irrigation purposes, of course, the problems started to arise. Indeed, there were many conflicts between these three countries, but in the end, I would say, either through bilateral agreements or joint technical committee meetings, or even by, as I said, like, the track 1.5 or, the track 2 diplomatic initiatives, they have somehow managed to regulate this water. And even though, it has made some state and non-state actors, unhappy, they have avoided conflict. And at the end of the day, I think, that's what matters, because when we look at, the more than, the 250 transboundary rivers across around the world, and there are many rare cases where, these agreements or institutional arrangements or provisional or permanent regimes make everybody happy. So I would say each, especially as the upstream riparian Turkey, is responsible for the downstream releases, flows, or the quality or quantity issues. But I don't think there will be another the conflict because of this water sharing or water allocation between the three countries.
Okay, great. So 2 or 3 questions will be quick. Okay, so we have only 5 minutes left. Bill, and then there are 2 more questions after that. Yeah?
William Hale, I used to be at Service. 2 questions really. One, regarding the question of supplying water to Syria and Iraq. This issue came up in the 1980s at the time that Turgut Özal was Prime Minister, and he reached an agreement with the then dictator of Syria, Hafez al-Assad, and Saddam, two unlike people you would have thought rather difficult to strike a bargain with, whereby there was to be a defined amount of water flowing through the Euphrates into Syria and then from the Euphrates into Iraq. In the case of Iraq, of course, they also have the Tigris, which comes directly from Turkey, so that the Syrians don't come in. I'm saying, has anybody thought of going back to that agreement of the 1980s? Now we've got a new government in Syria, Ahmed al-Shara. At least he is a reasonable person. You can do a deal with him.
But that agreement is still in effect, actually. I mean, that was an interim agreement, the 1987 protocol. It was, in fact, an economic protocol followed by a security, additional security protocol on the base, like, the condition was to expel the PKK from Syria. And so there was like this, twin agreement, but it's still in effect. So the 1987 agreement, which requires Turkey to release at least 500 cubic meters per second downstream, it's still in effect.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I don't think any downstream states have any incentive, or Turkey has any incentive to, change the change the terms.
So that agreement is still there. Is it?
Yeah. So let's take the remaining two questions back to back, and then we'll answer them together. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Osman. I'm also an MSc student here. I just wanted to ask how the impact of an earthquake, because it's not a possibility, it's a certainty for the landscape of Turkey, how this will further impact the water security and water infrastructure of Turkey, because we've already seen in southeastern Turkey the detrimental impacts. I was thinking as well, especially for the region of Istanbul, what kind of impacts we could be seeing and how to prevent it.
Great. And your question?
Yeah, very brief question. We very briefly discussed
Can
how.
you introduce yourself?
Sorry. I'm Aydan. I'm a PhD student from Grand South Science Institute in Italy.
Okay.
So yeah, we briefly discussed how individual activities and perceptions impact these relationship with people and water. I would like you to also discuss a bit about how recent economic activities like big industries, especially like mining sector, which with the new regulation on the mining law, that they removed the previous environmental assessment requirements. So how does this impact the current water crisis Turkey faces?
Okay, great. Thank you. Really interesting questions. Can you answer them in 2 minutes?
I just couldn't get the first one.
The earthquake, and I mean the possible, let's say, interactions between an earthquake and water security. It can work both ways, I guess. Anything from archaeological finds in terms of like how the earthquakes and this impacted the past?
I mean, the Constantinople system, earthquakes, in fact, are one of the major challenges to sustain that system, because it's very close to the North Anatolian Fault, and that region, although it's west of the city, actually has earthquakes, and you can actually see the signs of earthquake damage on them. And so, from my perspective, the greatest challenge of trying to maintain that system wasn't actually climate change or so other. It was actually to be able to rebuild after earthquakes, and that we know that happened. We can see that happen. And if it didn't happen, then there would be problems in the city, and that was reflected in terms of rioting and social disorder.
Right.
So,
So I mean,
challenges of earthquakes are like that in terms of social.
Yeah, I'll answer the second one.
Yeah.
You're right. But at the same time, the government institutions that are responsible for governing water are also trying hard to use water more effectively. For instance, 3 years ago, the national water efficiency agenda was, or national water efficiency campaign was initiated, and I think from a certain date onwards, all the industries, municipalities, they have to save certain amount of water, or use water more efficiently in order to be eligible to to keep using water. It's like, I think it speaks to one of the problems that I mentioned, like because of the lack of coordination between the government institutions, or maybe the inflation of certain institutions in the Turkish governance system. Sometimes there are positive things we see, but at the same time we see completely the things that are completely detrimental to environmental or the water security. That would be my answer.
okay, thank you very much. And I think time is up. Let me just finish with a little bit of an advertisement. So if you like this event, please go to our website, Contemporary Turkish Studies at LSE. You will see the Basilica system there on our banner. So we are really living this issue on our website in a way. And we do have lots of interesting events. There's another event coming up in May, so we do have a bit of a blank space, I guess, from here to the spring. But also follow the British Institute at Ankara. You can go to their website and also on social media. Of course, thank you very much to Arda and to Jim for this wonderful discussion. I think we all learned a lot. But I also want to thank the European Institute events team and Laura Maluf and everyone else who has been working today for us. And thanks also to Beth, who's not here, but who's been helping out with the British Institute at Ankara side of things. And I also want to thank the audience in online. I know it's very difficult to follow these events online, and sorry we couldn't see you on this occasion. And for those of you who are in the room now, we can enjoy the drinks reception, which is hopefully ready for us.
Thank you.